Go live. We're live. Hello everyone, how are we doing? Yes, it's the 21st of April. Yes, I have a package which is supposed to be back with Amazon on the by the 22nd of April, so that's going to be posted tomorrow. And yes, how are we all doing? How is everyone today? Yeah, that was some singing. Just felt like it today. Right then, hello John Shea, hello 96 everyone. Good lord. 96 everyone did manage to get first, I thought so. Yes, many have tried. There have been many sieges of Malta. There have been even more sieges of Malta than there have been perhaps are declared as sieges of Malta, because it sometimes depends on your definition. And so far today is, to be honest, I'm not covering just 4. There are more. There will be more. There are 4 official sieges of Malta, but there is at least one more thrown in, and I'm going to be mentioning others. Hello, Roland Cash. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, 96 everyone. Hello, Abzaski. Hello, Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Andrew Paul. Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, Calvin Gasbeck. Hello, Wayne Borian. Hello, DG40. Hello, DH89. Hello, Michael Rose. Hello, Captain C-Force. And hello, Andrew Paul. Ouch, painful jumps up from my ears for using new headphones at high volume. All of you presuming I'll be quiet. Apparently I will be. Where did that come from? Ah, well. Right, so. Hello, Summer in History. Hello, Stephen Richards. So. Hello, Andrew Bend. Captain C4. Hello, everyone. Now, the first thing. Why is the sieges of Malta rather relevant? And if anyone wants to tweet this out, they are more than welcome to. The sieges of Malta are relevant today and will always be relevant because, in the nicest way, every single time that anyone gets defeated, it is the civilians of Malta who do the bulk of the fighting because they provide the bulk of the numbers. There is almost never a large garrison on Malta. In fact, honestly, you can say of the major empires, of which Malta has been part of, the only one who actually at any point considered putting anything anything approaching a appropriate, and I said approaching an appropriate, please note approaching, not appropriate, and not saying it's appropriate, garrison was actually the British in World War II. That was after the war had started, by the way, not before the war, okay? Actually putting a decent garrison on Malta, considering its strategic value, seems to be beyond most people. So, whenever Malta is fighting these sieges, it is usually the civilians who do most of the fighting, the civilians who do most of the dying, and the civilians who mostly get mostly enslaved. So it's definitely civilians. Hello, James Duff, and hello, General Paul. Now, I'm hoping the sound is working this evening. People kept coming back to me and go, it's very quiet, and I'm going, I don't think it's quiet. I'm as loud as I ever am, and the bar is doing what it normally does, which goes ricocheting over to red. Admittedly, I do limit the sound a little bit. It gets cut off at a certain point, but it's not quiet by any stretch of the imagination. It's it lets the volume go up to 102% of what's considered the official volume. Let's hear on. Have you ever heard of the 1954 medium fleet aircraft carrier? It's in D.K. Brown's Rebuilding the Royal Navy. It's one of the many things the Royal Navy was considering in 1954. Doctor, can you name any other island as important to control such a large area? Hawaii gives you most of the Central Pacific. Let's see. Falkland Islands gives you a fairly large chunk of the South Atlantic and Antarctic. The Azores, right in the middle of the Atlantic, pretty darn useful. Caribbean ones all could theoretically have that capability. There are lots of islands which are quite well located. Hello, that's good. Hello, Zaski. Yeah, it's clipping slightly. Okay, let's have a go at the sound. Open the audio mixer. Make sure it's on the right thing. I don't want it on the default microphone. I want it on Razer Siren Elite, should be. Microphone. Razer Siren Elite. Apply. That should be better, he says. It should be better. Hello? Whoa. That should be better. And let's see, anything else I want to do on the settings? Oh, well, So I'm going to move that down lower because the gate had got massively high. So that should be better and less clippy clip. Hopefully, he says. Less clippy clip. I don't know. I really don't. Definitely less clippy clip. Hopefully. Oh, done. Midway, yeah. Midway, that's called St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Yes, that doesn't come up. There are basically lots of islands. Guam, yeah. And also, in that, people have asked me, were we really late this evening because of lack of iron brew supplies? And to that I answer, yes, we were, because it has taken all day for iron brew to actually arrive. And finally, fifth store I ordered from, or visited today, delivered, and you can see, rider collected at 6:15. So, 6:15, they collected 3 bottles of iron brew and 3 bags of mini cheddars, which apparently were what my mum wanted. I have had a conversation with her about her desire for mini cheddars, but I don't think it's ever going to change. She's not the type. She likes mini cheddars too much. What is this? Random pit envelope. Right. Andrew Paul, having read about the reconstruction of Victoria's recently, I think just how majestic a rebuilt Ark Royal had she survived World War II with an angled flight deck would look. Quite tall too. Yes, she would have been good. So let's start off with Canada. So, broadly speaking, I have got 2 days which are theoretically for public lectures in the evenings. Those are the 11th and the 6th. Those are the ones supposed to be, which is kind of an interesting one considering that means we could end up having a late night on the 6th and a very early morning on the 7th. But that's fun. I fly over to Canada on the 2nd. And I get there, and then I'm there. And then the next day, I go and visit Scout Haida, and I pick up Drak and a couple of our friends, hopefully Dan Freeman, etc., from Toronto Airport. And then we go to dinner with friends because some very nice people who I'm working with on some things in Canada over Canada have basically said, rather than you having restaurant food that evening, come to us. We'll feed you. Okay, it's nice of them. And then Saturday, we're doing the filming of Haida. Haida that day is open to the public. So you will see me, if you are wandering around Haida, you will probably bump into me and Drak wandering around doing our filming. And then it's dinner with the Canadian fans. And this is the point at which I wanted to talk about, and the reason I'm talking about this now, so I do apologize to people who like live and go, I want this admin stuff at the end. The reason I'm doing the beginning is this. Anyone who's in the area who'd like to come see us, you're more than welcome to. And I was hoping that a local or someone who knows the area would take charge of organising the dinner, preferably via Discord, to get sort of list together, make sure there's a booking and a table and all these things organised. Because the reason is, I can only book restaurants if I do it over Google reviews. Basically, I have to go Google reviews. And mine and Drak's criteria for food is that it be a lot of meat. Neither of us are inclined towards vegetarianism in any way, shape, or form. And usually barbecue or pizza. And as long as we can have those, we're happy wherever. So if someone would like to, if one of our Canadian viewers would like to take on the idea of the organising of that, and of finding a suitable restaurant and putting on Discord and finding out if anybody would like to come see me and Drac and have dinner with us and chat away, we would be very happy to see you. And we've put that on the Saturday night, and actually we thought that'd be best to put on the Saturday night because then people are free. They have the weekend. Sunday, one of the gentlemen coming with us is a big Blue Jays fan, and so he would really like to go, and so we basically decided there are going to be four, possibly 5 English gentlemen in the Blue Jays, watching the Blue Jays. And then Monday, we're hoping go to the Sullivans and Little Rock, see them. Then we had possibly the public lecture. That's the reason the public lectures are still question marks is because honestly, the Canadian people who are the organisers of them are worried about whether or not we get through all the if there are any COVID restrictions or anything like that. Then we fly to Halifax. We have an evening in Halifax, which we have nothing there. So if people would like to see us or whatever, we'll organise something. Then we're visiting filming Sackville on the 8th. And we have the evening free then. The next day we're doing Museum of the Atlantic and other archives. And then we fly back to Hamilton that evening. We leave Halifax at like 9 o'clock at night. We get back in Hamilton about 10 past 11. And then we have nothing yet scheduled for that Friday during the day. We then have the evening. Well, technically, I have to drop at some point that day. I drop Drac and anyone else who's going back to Toronto that day in Toronto. Then I have the evening free, but I might be seeing family. And then the 11th, it's go to Obja, which currently I'm scheduled, I think, to go on my own. I don't mind. I'm sort of looking at that. I'll be looking forward to that one. Then it's a public lecture, possibly number 2, and then it's the next day. It's fly home. But basically, as said, if on Discord, if you would like to, and you would be happy to take charge of organising the dinner on the 4th and getting some people together, and if people would like to do that, then we'd be more than happy for that to happen. Carmen Gasberg, as correct as you are, that could probably get us into trouble, that phraseology, on YouTube. So thank you, Stafford. And thank you, Stafford, for being here this evening. He is adminning away very happily. That's good. I'm surprised AG Bar haven't installed Iron Brew on tap yet in the office. If they do, I would be very, very happy man. I'd also possibly be the size of a house. Evening Tanith Velka. Thunder Kanama. What? You don't want the help of Microsoft Word Clippy? No, I don't. No one wants the help of Microsoft Word Clippy. Canada hasn't sieged Malta just about yet. None of those islands are island forts like Malta. No, Malta has really developed itself into quite a fortification over years, but that's basically where it starts and how it's the sort of the crusading era. Helps with the fortification. Hi, Sage. Andrew. Sounds awesome. Now I have a better idea. I will talk to my brothers and figure out a proper venue. If you want to run it, you are more than welcome to. There are a few. Let's put it this way: it would be very good if you do want to, but it's entirely. We're not, as it's entirely voluntary and it's being organised. But we thought it'd be a nice thing to just basically say, look, there's going to be a dinner a dinner thing. Someone's going to organise it. We'll be there. There's going to be at least 4 of us coming. If Dan's there, so there's going to be at least all 4 of us who are passionate about naval history, and however many Canadians are there. And that suddenly started sounding like a thing. Right then, where is a restaurant which is going to be suitable for possibly turning up with 8, 10, maybe a few more people who want to have dinner and chat into the evening and those sort of things. It's a case of, yeah. Nice, Aaron. Assuming the USS Sutherland has been refloated. It depends if my various diving skills are still viable. Hence, Darius, my response to Darius and Knight 6 everyone. I think, Richard, you'll need a fortnight holiday to recover. Yeah, that's good. But Stafford, if you want to take point on getting that together and set something up on the Discord, you're more than welcome to. Because honestly, there isn't. I don't want to upset any of my other Canadian viewers, but I have to admit, after chatting with Stafford on several occasions, I will say this: there is Canadians who are always nice and generous, and then there is Stafford, who takes being Canadian very seriously, in my opinion, of being nice and generous. Ryan Cash, very generous. Also, have arranged a trip to Belfast, Kadisaka Maritime Museum on 29th to ease the pain. You'll enjoy those. They are good. Right then, let's get into the thing we're here to do proper. The sieges of Malta. Wayne Boren. Alex, you don't want me setting up that. You'd end up sending a pizza blast of the century. Well, Wayne, perhaps if you can help Stafford out. Thank you. Hannah Malaga and Hannah Derp Squad. Derp Squad. I think my current insurance public liability is a few million. So I think I'm okay. I think my public liability is 5 million. And I have that because of filming in historic dockyards. You have to have public liability insurance if you want to do anything in them. Oh, it's lovely, but it's his, yeah. And let's see, I'll make that 17 minutes, and I'll say 06 Canada trip. Sorry, I'm just filling in quickly a timestamp so that people who want to skip the thing can skip the Canada stuff. There we go. So, the sieges of Malta. Now, I have to say, there is something which is really quite cool. If you can find a full translation, you're better than me. Antigonus Achilles basically has written almost a version of the Iliad. And it's all about the sieges of Malta. And it's written in 1570, so after the Great Siege. And I kid you not, it is massively, massively long. However, it is also mostly not being translated properly into English, at least any version I've been able to track down. I'm sure there is a version somewhere in English, but I haven't managed to find it. And so, this is a section I've got. Of the knights, the arms, the distinguished officers, killings and assaults I sing, of woundings and destructions which were seen in recent times, because moved by profound anger and treachery, the Emperor of the Turks raised a great fleet to send to Malta, so that the friends of St. John might be overwhelmed. Now, these are the 4 sieges of Malta, which are the official 4. As said, I'm going to be covering more than them. The Siege of Malta, a siege by the Moors of the Hassafid Empire. The Siege of Malta in 1565, the Great Siege of the Ottoman Empire. Siege of Malta, a siege by the British and Maltese against the French. In case of Knight 681, that might well explain to you how the British succeeded in the 1798 to 1800 siege, whereas the others failed. There is a small difference. When the Maltese don't want you there, then you're basically under siege on Malta by the Maltese. That's never a good thing. And then Siege of Malta, World War II, by the Axis powers. And the point I'm going to make over and over again is this. Do not count out the Maltese citizens. They are very capable. Doge Scott, what about insurance for rescuing underneath the Sullivans? I'll take Drac. Wayne Boren, Naval Association meeting in London next Friday. It'll be the first public event I've attended since the COVID. I've been chatting away with them. They're very nice people, the Naval Association. I'm hoping that one of the public events I end up doing, if I do end up in any public events, I do something for them. I'm out there in Canada, but leave that to one side. We're on to Malta. Not a wolf. Hopefully one of these days I'll be able to meet you guys. And pretty much that's what we're getting from. So, Wayne Boren just said Maltese are like the Ukrainians. In fact, I'd say they're kind of like any nation which has a strong culture. And the Maltese do have a very strong culture. One of my ex-girlfriends, now a friend, we were dated when we were teenagers, so a long, long time ago, is Maltese. And I always remember whenever I met her family how passionately Maltese they were. Which, please don't take that. Don't take it wrong. They are not pushy. They don't want. They're not sort of a case of we're superior to everyone because of our culture or anything like that. It's more a case of they're very comfortable and very happy to be Maltese. It's something inside them. They wear their national pride not like a armored jacket or like some sort of gaudy silk, but more like a comfortable fleece. It's there. It's always there when you need it. And it's this sort of constant thing. And they are lovely. They are really, really lovely. But they have also suffered because of their position in the world. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world to visit. It is an island which has truly amazing food. The food is really, really good. Truly amazing history. I think the line I've used in the Long Patrol, which I recorded earlier today, is it's the only place where you can walk through 10 centuries in 10 minutes. You literally can walk through 10 centuries in 10 minutes. And they are lovely, gregarious people. If you were just looking at the island itself, there is no earthly reason to invade it. It should not have the martial culture and the martial fortifications it does. It should not. There is not enough food there for anyone to go and invade and take it. It's got enough to support the population, but not more. It's got lovely people, but that's not a population you really need or want to control because it's not going to supply mass armies. Yes, it's got fresh water, but so do a lot of easier places to get to. The whole purpose of that Malta and people going there is it's basically, and I swear, Terry Pratchett's book Jingo, which is all around an island which occasionally pops up and then sinks down between Ankh-Morpork and another empire. And the only value of that empire is if you're going to invade the other, or it's not the other one not invade you. Otherwise, it has no value. It is completely pointless. In fact, it's made of pumice, which means it's absolutely pointless. Malta is a lovely, beautiful place. It is not pointless. But the only reason you are taking it is because you want to go other places or you want to control areas of water. It is no value in and of itself. Its value is in completely its location. It is an entire history of location, location, location. And the trouble for poor Malta is it always sits at the crossroads, north, south, east, west, in the Mediterranean. And it sits right in the middle. And it always looks like the soft target. It always looks like the easy option. Oh, we can't. Sicily's the bigger, better island, but that's going to take a mountain to get. Whereas if we get Malta, that gives us all the strategic range and options of having an island there, with far easier to secure. You can hear the debate that's gone on 100, 1,000 times in the halls of power. And at no point has any of those debates gone, but the Maltese are such nice people we want to control. They have these wonderful universities. We want their knowledge or anything like that. No point have those debates encompassed the people or anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why Malta keeps winning. Because when everyone invades it, they're looking at it as a lump of rock in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the sea. They are forgetting the people. They are forgetting the culture. They are forgetting that to survive on a lump of rock in the middle of the sea, you need to be quite a tenacious personality in the first place. This is Malta. It's the little a bit of black you can see just below Sicily, next to that one of those trade routes. Think about all those trade routes going through east and west, north and south. Malta sits in the middle of them. If you want to control them, if you want to raid them, if you want to influence them, if you want to blockade them, if you want to do any manipulation on those routes at all, Malta is where you want. If you want to go on crusades, Malta is one of the key points you need to protect and to support the crusades going through. Everything comes down to Malta as this point of transition. DH89, Portuguese tenacity in the peninsula was heroic if we're mentioning defiant locals like the Maltese and Ukrainians. Yes, it was. And someday I will do a bit of a more video about them. I've done a bit of one, but not much. I'd like to do more about the lines of Torres Vedras. I'd like to visit the lines of Torres Vedras, but the trouble is if I go to Portugal, I have enough friends on the Iberian Peninsula that I will get distracted and spend most of my time having dinners and being fed, because they do lovely food. In fact, several of my friends on the Iberian Peninsula, Spanish and Portuguese, are chefs. So I would go out one weight and come back about twice as heavy. DH09, 10 centuries in 10 minutes. I'm not lying. You can literally, if you're walking up some of the streets in Malta, that is what you feel like. You're literally feeling like you're going through 10 centuries in 10 minutes. You can look up and you can see early medieval, late Roman architecture, especially on the island of Gonzo as well, more, just as much as Malta, which in Gonzo always feels slightly less developed. It's just special. Nice hearing. Malta is a strategic point in the Mediterranean. True. And report, the Mediterranean Sea is one of the most contested water bodies in history, and Malta has been at the centre of it all, literally and figuratively. Saying a lot of history in the island is a gross understatement. Yeah, the trouble is, there isn't really the words for encapsulating just how much history has affected and interacted on that island. Runcash, the salt production value. At times when salt was the key preservative, yes, it was quite valuable, but not valuable enough to risk invading the island. That's good, but the Maltese don't have the same word for stranger and target. No, but I refer you to the lovely Stafford, who has mentioned had a similar scenario, and completely understand agree with you. Her father was one of the kindest men until he got mad, as a good doctor say, and then it's run. Yeah, they are lovely, lovely people, but they love big, they live big. They can give me a run for money and loudness when they want to. Ah. Mm. Naturally, so the British didn't view it like that, did they? The British honestly viewed Malta as this wonderful spot for them. In the nicest way, the British viewed it as the ability of their presence in the area, and they didn't need to do anything. As long as Malta was happy with the British being there, because the British didn't want to run things in Malta, they just wanted a naval base. And in return, the Maltese didn't have to deal with anyone else invading them. In many ways, the British were the nicest friends they ever had, because the British basically turned up and went, we're going to be occupying, we're going to do absolutely tod all. All we want is a navy base, and in return, we will leave you all to yourselves. Oh, and we'll have lots of people coming in, spending money and buying stuff. That's called control Gibraltar, Malta, and Alexandria. You control the Mediterranean. Malta, Gibraltar, and the Dardanelles, the three choke points of the Mediterranean. I would add Suez as a fourth choke point, because the canal has, although the canal's an artificial choke point, it is another choke point in the Mediterranean. Ian's travelling. Thinks he does not know anyone in that part of the planet. Gozo. Naval, Gozo. Gonzo was a Muppet. Sorry. But it's beautiful. And also, again, I was one of the other videos I was discussing cruises, and there is a wonderful cruise through the Mediterranean. I know because my aunt and uncle did this, and it starts at Gibraltar, and it goes all the way around, stops in Sicily, goes round, and then goes through Greece, Crete, Cyprus, and then it goes back, and it stops in Alexandria, and then it goes to Malta, and then it stops in somewhere, I think in Morocco, and then it gets back to Gibraltar. And basically, that's what they did that run, and they just had a wonderful time. That's good. The Dardanelles are nice to have, but they don't matter as much as because then you just get the Black Sea. They're a critical point for Russia, though. Right. But no, this is what you're dealing with. This is the world that Malta inhabits. And I picked this map specifically because you have the main Genoan routes pictured, which you can see, the main Venetian routes, and the main connecting routes. And those are routes which are applied by many, many different trading factions. And if you notice, the Genoan, the connecting routes, and the Venetian routes all go past Malta. All those routes. Yes, there are the land routes going on and the various things going on land, but the sea is the major arteries. The sea is the major trading route. And so if you want to influence these things, Malta becomes a no-brainer. It becomes a critical area. You can also, when you look at it and you see the vibrancy of the trading routes going on, you start to really get an image of, well, hang on, those land routes they're going along, the coast roads, etc. There are some critical points being moved around. Haven't seen Trento as a 4/5 choke point, depending on the period? Depending on the period. It depends on when and what you're doing and who's got control of what part of the Adriatic Sea. But what cannot be overstated here, and it's the key point to make at this point, a juncture, is that throughout history, and especially in the modern world, there is a very common lie which almost everyone likes to subscribe to. And that lie is globalization, as in it's something new. We have lived in a global economy for almost as long as there have been states. Because states trade. And they tend to trade not just in one direction, they tend to trade in multiple directions. So the trade tends to flow through. And especially as if you've got trade flowing through, you can tax it so you earn money. And the best way to earn money is moving goods from where they are plentiful to where they are not, or where they are scarce, and charging for your time and effort. And then taking goods from that place, which are plentiful, back to where you came from, where they're preferably scarce. Or occasionally going in a triangular route if you have plentiful but scarce, plentiful but scarce, and plentiful but scarce to go around. That is what we tend to sort of do in terms of trading. That is what you sort of need to think about when you're dealing with an economy in a place like Malta. Simply put, if there was no global trade network, if there was no trade going around, Malta would not be worth invading. And Malta has been a site of occupation, if you consider the city of Medina here, for a very, very long time. An incredibly long time. The city of Medina, if I'm remembering correct, and I'm going to look it up again, even though I've done this in a long patrol, I've done this in my notes, but I'm going to check it again. The city of Medina has been, we are pretty certain, established as early as the 8th century before Christ, before Common Era, no matter whatever you want to say, as a place called Malef. By the 11th century AD, it's known as Medina. If I put that another way, we're dealing with a site which we are certain has been inhabited for roughly 2,800 years. 2,800 years. There have been continuous dwellings and occupancy on this site. 2,800 years. Medina is mostly built on previous versions of Medina. Now, it's got various pronunciations you can go around it, but it is an absolutely beautiful place. I absolutely recommend if you go see it walking up to it. That is one of the great things you can do in Malta. You can walk quite a lot of places if you want to. And you get a really good idea of what some of the later fortifications have. But if you look closely at this picture, you can see some of the earlier fortifications. And this is the site of the really big battle in that first siege. The first really big siege of Malta, this is where it takes place. Yes, there are fortifications here which have been added on, and pretty much every single siege that has ever happened in Malta has involved fights in Medina. The French occupation, every other point, there have been fights in Medina. But it's critical. And it is a critical presence. I would argue there are some interesting histories around Medina and a few of the other places. There are some interesting archaeology. And I will also add that the fact is between the transition from Malif to Medina, the pattern of the city does change almost completely. But to me, that doesn't necessarily mean no longer occupation. That does potentially suggest that there was a change in occupier. But I will leave that to archaeologists and paleontologists to figure out. It's a little bit sort of before the sort of record era that I can use to really get the full history. It's more the saga era. Oh gosh, if I had a time machine, I would travel back to see the Royal Navy battleships in the Grand Harbour. What a sight. That would be a good one. Yeah, I have to admit, if I was a billionaire, the first thing I'd do is start building old ships. I'd get HMS Dreadnought will be rebuilt. I'd have to have a pre-Dreadnought as well. I'd have to pick one. I have an idea which one I'd pick, but, you know. And I want to build a battle cruiser, several destroyers from different periods, several cruisers. I just build sort of my own sort of private rebuilt fleet. I'd keep a shipyard going for a few years, building them as accurate to history as possible, while still having all the modern necessary things, so that I could then have a historical fleet which goes around the world, takes part in movies, but also does things like, you know, turns up and does historical displays and basically a mobile history teaching facility. Why am I not a billionaire? I'd have so much fun. Wayne Burren, sorry Alex, but this is my area of expertise. We have solid evidence of globalization going back close to 1 million years. Thank you, but that's, as I said, that was what I was trying to say without saying 1 million years, basically. As long as there have been states, is my view, or states and organizations, and I would say that goes back a long, long way. As long as humanity's been around, I'm fairly certain we've been organizing into groups. So I love how you can see the outline original walls and the Starfort added on it. Yeah, honestly, for anyone who's got any passion for building and construction, walking around Malta is an entire experience and a half. I have to wonder if the people of Malta would have adopted the aircraft carrier Malta. They would have. Let's be honest. If the people of Malta, if HMS Malta had turned up, an aircraft carrier, a brand new aircraft carrier had turned up, named for their city, they would have loved it. It would have been blessed. They would have figured out some way to give it a silver bell and a blessing ceremony. It would have had everything. It would have been like a tribal HMS Asante's visit to the Asante tribe, or HMS New Zealand's trip to New Zealand. The Maltans would have come out in drove. The Maltese would have been there. They'd have been all over her. Andrew Paul, I like your planning. HMS Renan will be sailing the seas in a few years again. Admittedly, 15-inch guns may or may not work. That would take some money, but if you have the billions, do it. Code 85. So like the little fleet run by the Jamestown Historic Site. Yeah, but just on a global scale with, as Dan O'Connor has suggested, perhaps a flotilla of tribal class destroyers, a flotilla of battle class destroyers, and a flotilla of daring class destroyers as its escorts. they'd have covered her in Maltese crosses. Oh, yes, they would have. She would have been bedecked, bedazzled, bejeweled in Maltese crosses. So this is the first siege. And, okay, so I always admit there are always some things which overlap between the Long Patrol and the Live, because I tend to try and, while I try and include some stuff in the Long Patrol which isn't necessarily relevant in the Live because of the way the questions go, I also like to make them similar enough that if people want to just watch one because they don't like watching a Live or they don't watch the Long Patrol, they still get out as much as they can. So here's the first thing. Cavian Ridvan of the Hasford Kingdom is in charge of 18,000 men. We know this. No one's quite sure officially who's in charge of the technically Kingdom of Sicily forces which defend Medina and Malta. We know there are 4,000 soldiers drawn from the Aragonese force, 300 Maltese Demja Coastal Guard, Demja, the Coastal Guard soldiers, and the local household troops, who, from the accounts, I think supply the majority of the troops. And local household troops are something which turn up quite a lot in Maltese history. Plus, between 16 and 18,000 civilians took up arms. Now, here is my working theory, and it's my working theory. Please note this. Now, I have dealt in the UK history quite often, and with some histories of other places where the British have gone, and in this same period, where there has been no idea of who's in command. There's no big portraits done, no canonization, no shouting from the hilltops by the local, by the Catholic Church, or for the evil Islamic, well, please note I'm doing this in the phraseology of the Catholic Church at the time before anyone gets offended. How they portray it would be the evil Islamic crusaders coming to take this brilliant Christian place. You'd expect, under those circumstances, the valiant leader, the commander of the forces who defended Malta, to be lionized. There are two categories where they wouldn't be. One, if they are not Christian, which is highly unlikely in Malta. Or two, if the person who's really running the defense is not a man. Now, please let me explain. There are many cases in history, especially in England and Scotland, but also in France, in various parts of Normandy and in various parts of Italy, etc., where when the local lord is away, the big senior lord, the one who runs the manor and the estates is his wife. She's in charge. She's the lady of the manor. So let's put it this way. There were some big battles going on at this point, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the big local lord, who should have been running Medina, etc., has been off fighting them and is nowhere near here to command. In which case his wife would be in charge. So whilst there would be male commanders who would probably be leading the troops, she'd be coordinating and organising the defence, leading it. Possibly even going full, Catherine of Aragon and fighting in it, or Joan of Arc or the others and fighting in the defence. But either way, the church is not going to be too keen on lionising her. And the trouble is they then can't make a big fuss of the male commanders who were subordinate to her because, well, the big lord might take that as an offence. And in which case, if the big lord is powerful enough, they're going to find themselves in trouble. And those other minor lords might find themselves in a lot of trouble for slighting his wife. So this is where I come down to it. My strong suspicion is that the person who ended up running the defense of Medina and making sure the defense worked was probably the local lady of the manor. I'm not 100% sure, honestly, of the sieges of Malta and of the ones I've studied in depth. This is probably the one I know the least amount, but this is also the one which there is the least amount about. There are literally 3 good books which are in English language. There is one section which is translated by my one section from another good book, which is not in English, but which was translated by my ex-girlfriend for me. Her and her husband very kindly went through when I was teaching this a couple of years ago, and I went, "Oh, I can't find this section." And again, whenever the command structure is mentioned in a way, it's always very messy over this one might be in charge or this one might be in charge, which is another good example of that usually means that the contemporary accounts are trying to very much not say who's actually in charge. So that is my suspicion. And it also would fit because, again, if most of the good troops, the sort of professional soldiers, come from the local household troops, and you're also depending upon 16 to 18,000 civilians, it's not going to be a Spanish or even a foreign noble in charge. It's going to be a local. It's going to be someone who has a strong local connection. Which means it has to either be the local lord of the manor who's in charge, and in which case we'd know about it, his name would be written down, he'd be canonized, or it is his wife. And so that is my suspicion. I'd also add that whilst we're fairly certain about this flag and the later one for the Ottomans are best guesses based on sources at the time. They really are. Dunragama, do we have some female contenders, or are they all gone? When I mentioned this and I discussed this, as I said, with a couple of people from Malta, they sat there and gone, well, there are several powerful ladies around at the time, and let's be honest, again, if you have ever had the they are some very intelligent and fiercely intelligent people, so we're not really sure. No, Scott, if the person with the offences was a mercenary, they might go unmentioned. Yeah, but the trouble is, and this is the problem, Derp Squad, would you trust a Muslim mercenary in charge of your troops if you were Malta at this point? That's the problem. Whilst these days we wouldn't tend to necessarily have the issues and we can think it through as a potential, the likelihood in this particular period is very, very low of that one. In fact, I would say it's low to almost impossible in Malta at this case. Malta does still have a population, but I don't think necessarily one of them would have been put in charge. I think, again, it's going to sound strange. If there had been such a scenario, he'd been portrayed as a conversion. Especially when they, and this is one of the points of it, and one of the points which I think does strongly suggest to me that there is possibly a female commander in charge, is that the local legends illustrate 3 saints as taking part in the defence. St. George. St. George always appears. Might mean there are some longbowmen taking part who turned up from the various operations up in sort of northern Italy, but I doubt that. And St. George is also patron saint of the local area, so... St. Paul, who apparently appears on a white horse with a dagger in his hand to defend the Maltese. And St. Agatha. Now that's kind of an interesting one. If you're going to imagine any sort of saints appearing to defend you in this scenario, would it be St. Agatha, who is patron saint of, well, let's be honest, and probably appropriate for the sage, St. Agatha is the patron saint of rape victims, breast cancer patients, wet nurses, and bell founders. She's also patron saint of Malta, because in 1551, she appeared to a Benedictine nun and helped that nun provide guidance to save Malta from the Turkish invasion. That's the other option for someone being in charge or running, or being powerful enough to run it. It would be the leader of the local nunnery. But I'm thinking, the point I'm coming to more and more is I think it was a female, there was a powerful, politically powerful lady was in charge of the defense. And it's St. Agatha especially makes that very sort of interesting and likely to me, her presence and her involvement. That's good. It would be, if they were all known an enemy of the Hafsid kingdom, it wouldn't be impossible. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying they came to mind. The trouble is, the only other ones who are enemies of the Hafsid kingdom all come from the Ottomans. And that would be the problems. And also, you have the Aragonese troops there as well. And the Aragonese troops come from Aragon in Spain. And yeah, they're interesting. So basically, the entire combination means, whilst I did consider and think through your option, I came down to it less. Code 85. Or the person could have been someone who's excommunicated. Not impossible, but let's be honest, they'd have been forgiven and made a big or that would have been quietly forgotten about as done after their victory. Basically, they would have earned their way back into virtue and love of Christ by by beating the invaders. A minor history of the Moors. There's always something going on. Anyway, so let's get into the ones where we start to get more of it. This is the Citadel of Gozo, and yeah, Gozo is, well, okay, let's start off with the Citadel. It's one of the most beautiful things you will see if you go to the island of Gozo. It is absolutely beautiful. It is known as the Citadel of Victoria, and the area has been inhabited since the Bronze Age. The Stilla is believed to have originally been the Acropolis of the Punic Roman city of Gallus or Glavius Civitas. During the early medieval period, the Acropolis, the old city, was converted into what we see now, a castle, which was to serve as a refuge for Gozo's population should they be attacked. The suburb grew much too big for the walls. In fact, by the 15th century, they expanded quite dramatically outside of it. And the castle's defences, well, to say they're obsolete by the 16th century is to be being polite. And in 1551, when they invade, when the Ottomans turn up, they're in trouble. But it is beautiful, and it's one of the things I always find about it is it sits almost slap bang in the middle to an extent of the island. Honestly, if you're sort of going da 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 da, it's just slightly down from the middle, and it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful, and if you, I'm told that hill, walking up the hill is wonderful, and looking out over that hill. I haven't done actually that specific walk myself, but I've got photos from friends, but they've got the friends in them, which is why they're not being used this evening. And literally walking up there and taking the photo looking back is just something to see. Oh, gosh, St. Agatha has some very interesting iconography. Yes, she does. That's good. When you say they arm the citizens, do we know if it was men or both men and women? Well, let's put it this way. The phraseologies are very interesting, but basically it's usually phrased as the citizens took up arms. So, and again, if we go by history, what happens in Venice and various other points at this time? The women do man the walls. They do pick up ranged weapons. Crossbows, especially, are popular with the middle class women. They will be chucking stones from the walls. They'll be carrying weapons up and down. It's in the nicest way. The idea we have, this idolized idea of history, that the men went off to war and the women stayed home and did nothing, is completely ahistorical and inaccurate. For starters, they don't have that choice. The war tends to come to them, especially in a siege. And in the nicest way, usually what happens if a siege falls is the men, especially the noblemen, can surrender and maybe they'll get ransomed. And same for the rich women. Maybe if they can find someone powerful enough to surrender to, they'll be protected and ransomed. Maybe. But for the poor, the middle class, it's horrific. So in the nicest way, you then have a choice. You can cower and do nothing, or you can try and aid in the defense as best you can to try and ward off that happening. And guess what? The vast majority do not pick cowering. And again, you cannot overstate how brutal sieges are. That's good. The ambiguity suggests that both are involved. I know many castle sieges were commanded by women, and as men were off fighting. Yeah. So this is my suspicion as to, as I said, the other one. Yeah, Wayne Boren, you've correctly grasped what ahistorical means when a historian says it. This is what Malta is. Malta is an island under siege. At any point, these islands are entirely under siege, and therefore, that's what happens. So, in many ways, we have the problem of the Victorian era and the Victorian high-mindedness, and that's the legacy we'll live to say. If you, I saw an advert and a discussion a few years ago saying no other animal likes to pretend that the female of the species are less capable of fighting than the male. They can't fight in the same way as the male. Usually males are built for brute strength and power, but often the female of the species, and this is me, tremendous, I'm going to get biologists coming at me, and I know I work with enough of them, but usually the females of the species are built more for speed and brain power. And let's be honest, both, and it's the combination. It's, in the close quarter fight, yeah, brute force will sometimes win, but let's be honest, That's in the scenario where you're managing to deploy the brute force. If you're smart enough, you can make it so that the other person can't deploy the brute force. Good example of that is look at the way castles are designed. When you're going up the stairs, if you've ever tried to go up in a castle, and if you imagined you were holding a shield, your left arm, you raise your sword up your right arm. If you're going up, you can't raise your sword or an axe or any other weapon you're using because you're going to hit the stairs. But if you're defending and going down, you've got space to whack. So yeah, person coming up, I might have power on you, but I can't use it. Whereas you coming down can use your power and precision. Just because something is different and has to operate differently doesn't mean it's less able. And in many ways, we have to be very careful about the Victorian era and its legacies in our mindsets. So, again, this leads me more and more to sort of saying, well, yeah. Malta, the women are freaking scary. And Rowan Cash, many women marched with armies back in the day. Yes, they did. There were usually women following the armies. And sometimes they got involved in the fight. That's good. When you say surrender to a powerful enemy, I assume there was usually more than just money involved in the exchange. It depends on the enemy. I have got one forebear in my family who, no, it was literally a money transaction. Mainly because, in the nicest way, I think he was scared of his own wife. As scary as it was the enemy, I didn't think he went up to set his own wife. So that was that. But, yeah, there are others where it would be a more complicated exchange, let's say. Sigil 90, what about lefties? Don't try and find a castle. Although if you're left-handed, you're going to have an advantage going up. And as Dirt Squad says, you're going to have trouble with your shield movement. But no, the Citadel of Gozo, it's a site which has been inhabited since the Bronze Age. And has been fought over many, many times. So, invasion of Gozo in 1551. Now, this is possibly one of the best examples from history of why you don't do this. Now, the Ottomans expand their empire in phases, and you can see the expansion going on. In 1551, a fleet turns up at Malta with 10,000 troops, under the command of Sinan Pasha and Salares. But let's be honest, Dragut, the pirate lord, as he's sometimes called, but is really one of the Ottoman admirals in some respects, is pretty much in charge. And they attack Malta first, and they find it very, very tough, and they don't want to carry on there. So they go to Gozo. And Gilles and the Caesar and roughly 6,000 soldier civilians are caught inside the citadel and that area. So if you can imagine, 6,000 people, roughly. Possibly, there is a debate as to whether there could be as many as 10,000, but that doesn't really make sense to me. I'd say more likely the entire island's population was 10,000 than that they had 10,000. But we know 6,000 soldier civilians, and very quickly they end up having to surrender. They very quickly end up having to surrender. And most of these 6,000 soldiers and civilians are taken away as slaves. Pretty much wipes out the population of Gozo. That's what happens when you lose. That's your motivator. That's the reason why I say I don't find people likely to be sitting there going, oh, I'm not going to fight, I'm scared. Because what happens to you if you lose? Now, why am I going to say that this is one of the most stupid things the Ottomans did? And why has this become appropriate? Because this is kind of like Ukraine and Gallipoli with the Dardanelles. Okay, so the Ottomans turn up. They carry out this assault. They fail with Malta, but they basically go, "Okay, all right, they'll be coming back," and the Maltese go, "We need to prepare." And just like Ukraine, 8 years to prepare for Ukraine, because they first invaded in 2014, so the army you're fighting now is very different than the army the Russians were fighting 8 years ago. And with Gallipoli, where the Royal Navy turned up, blasted away, didn't have any of those specially modified, fitted out for pre-dreadnoughts to smash through the minefields, as I've suggested they could have done, and they did look at. So they ended up not going forward, and told the Ottomans they were coming, so the Ottomans defended it. They turn up in Malta in 1551, give up Malta, go to Gozo, go away with a load of slaves, and don't come back for 14 years. Anyone want to guess what the Maltese do in 14 years? That modern island fortress that you see in front of you when you go to Malta, that absolutely bedrock of walls and defensive positions, that is mostly a legacy not of the Great Siege itself, but of the invasion of Gozo and the preparations for what they thought was coming. Because they thought the Ottomans would come the next year. They didn't. Then they thought, well, they're going to come the next year. They're going to come the next year. They kept thinking they were going to come the next year, so they kept strengthening their defenses until 14 years later, finally the Ottomans turn up and they turn in and go, holy sugar, what have you lot been building? There is that line of Gimli and the dwarf. He says in Lord of the Rings, when he first sees Helm's Deep, give me a few dwarfs and a little bit of time, and I'll turn this into a fortress that will never be taken. Well, what the Knights of St. John did, and their Grand Master did, was they hired the very best military engineers they could get, repeatedly, and had them survey and improve their defences every year on year for 14 years. They trained, they raised taxes, they trained their troops, they mobilized everything. They had all their allies called up. Their allies were keeping troops there. Everyone was keeping troops there for 14 years. And the Maltese civilians, the population themselves, were also getting involved. This is not... If the Ottomans had turned up in 1552, they might have had a chance. 1553, take had even Stevens. 14 years, you're going to be dealing with some well-prepared defensive positions. And as we all know, if you have to choose where to fight from an unprepared or a prepared position, you always pick a prepared position. Always. How Dick Richards? How Jim Cusick? Take care, Wayne Warren. Enjoy nap time. Decision 90. There must have been special tactics devised to counter that advantage. Honestly, the trouble is the way the stairs were designed. It made it very difficult to design counter attacks tactics to counter it, because you couldn't bring up pole arms, because again the way the actual they calculated actually the height of the steps and the width of the stair and the rate of the circle, the rate of the spiral as best they can to make it very difficult for you to deploy pole arms. So this reminds me of the meme of modern historians fighting over small numbers and ancient historians going 10,000 or 100,000. I don't know, make it a million. Right, guys, surely wiping out is only if you resist in the first place. Weren't those the unwritten rules? Surrender and live, resist and get wiped out. No, in the medieval period, in this period, is surrender versus the Ottomans, you're enslaved. Resist, you get killed or enslaved. There are slightly differences between Christian powers and between Muslim powers, but between each other, it's not really nice. Sorry, moth. You know I don't like those. They go after my books. Gone. Mm-hmm. All right. Serious none of this, but if you actually have to storm the castle, there must be someone, some thought into how to counter that. Archers and basically scaling ladders so you can try and get up the sides and come down from the top above them, catch the defenders in the middle. And as sieges, that's what I said. Don't know, Peter Jackson, why did you have to give that line to Theoden and have him say it to Gimli? Well, slightly altered. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the invasion of Gozo is a brutal affair on both sides. It really is. Right. Now, as mentioned, as a result of the invasion of Gozo and the sea invasion of Gozo, there's this gentleman called Juan de Homidis, who is the Grand Master of the Order of St. John. And, well, it gets very encouraging about this point. It took 150 years, by the way, for Gozo's population to recover to pre-1551 levels. Gozotans, some managed to redeem themselves from slavery, and notably the very important Reverend Lorenzo de Apis, who managed to get back to Gozo in 1554. But many, in fact the vast majority, would never see their island ever again. So Juan de Homidis sets up a commission, and he gets in Leon Strozzi and Pietro Parrotto, who, as said, were pretty preeminent engineers, to examine the fortifications and make suggestions of further improvements. He increased taxation, strengthened the coastal guard, that's the Demshma, and increases their numbers and training. And after the commission, well, they build Fort St. Michael, Fort St. Elmo, bastions are built at Medina and Bergu. This is Fort St. Angelo at Bergu. It's supposed to be Birgu. I'm sorry, for some reason, the thing just keeps resetting it to that. PowerPoint, I have no idea why. Also, they built fortifications at Sengela. And the fortifications will prove their worth. Not only is Malta, of course, attacked several times again. Great Siege of Malta, 1565, 14 years later after the attack on Gonzo. But Gonzo itself will be again attacked unsuccessfully again in 1613 and 1709. Gozo will fail to fall. But it's interesting to note that in 1700, you are talking just about the time which Gozo's population has recovered to the level it was pre-1551. That's how devastating an attack it was. The archives of the University of Gozo were also destroyed by the Ottomans during the attack. They, in a simple words, probably not through direct emphasis, but certainly as a consequence of their actions, were wiping out their history as well as their people. You know, you're talking between 5,000 and 6,000 of Gozo's population are enslaved. Would help if I could spell. I need my Fort St. Angelo notes. Now, I have to admit, again, if there's any fort you want to go see in Malta, I would recommend this one. It is one of the most beautiful and one of the best to go see. It's been added to do several times. It's had multiple batteries put installed it, and it is absolutely beautiful, but it's in a very commanding position, in a very critical position. It's located at the center of the Grand Harbour. It was originally called the Castrum Maris. It's rebuilt by the Order of St. John into the Fort St. Angelo, as we've seen, between 1530s and 1560s. Most of the work taking place in the 1550s. And it was the Order's headquarters during the Siege of Malta in 1565. It was massively reconstructed by Carlos de Grumberg in the 1690s, which gives the fort its current appearance. But honestly, it is well deserving of its UNESCO World Heritage Site, which it was sort of tentative. It has been on the tentative list of since 1998. It's a absolutely amazing position, and you can see why it caused so much trouble, because it basically means that a besieging force, okay, to take it, you have to first take the Grand Harbour. It's very difficult to take the Grand Harbour without taking this castle. But you can't really take this castle unless you've taken the Grand Harbour. So no, I didn't even know Gozo existed. Go there, you'll love it. Peterson, didn't the main talk start at 5 p.m. this evening? I think it started at 6:45, because usually it starts about 6:30 my time. Today it was delayed slightly because of Iron Brew supplies. Hello, Dan Freeman. Hello, Melanie Richards. Rungash, also a fantastic place to sit as the sun goes down with a cool glass of, well, he's put white wine, but I would of course say iron brew. Speaking of which, my glass is empty. Beautiful place to go. Absolutely amazing. And again, from memory, there is a restaurant on the seaward side, the other side of this photo, which does an absolutely beautiful version. Well, I would call it a Maltese version of a carbonara, which is absolutely gorgeous. I was at a hair appointment. I'm sure you look lovely, and I hope you had a lovely time. See, only boy and 40 cousins, well trained. Cool, Dan. Well, yes, you are expected. I'm hoping you're coming. You're very much expected. There's lots of people looking forward to meeting you. So, surprisingly, now we have huge records of who's in charge. It's kind of like we have huge records of who's in charge of Gozo. So again, going back, strong suspicions going on here about exactly what, well, the gender, if not the name or the actual personage of who was in charge of the Maltese during this siege. But this time, it's under Jean Parasot de Valeta and González de Madrón, who were the Order of St. John. Madrón is killed in the siege. Melchor de Nobles and Garcia Alvarez de Toledo were from the Empire of Spain. De los Robles was killed. They have, 2,500 soldiers, plus 6,000 from the Order, basically from of Malta, but it expands to 6,100, including militia, servants, and galley slaves. I'm presuming by militia they're referring to the soldiers and militia. I'm presuming they're referring to the Demja, the coastal guard. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're also including some of the household retinues troops. I think from memory, the Burliscare. I think that's how they're called, but I could be getting that wrong with the Northern Italy name versus the local one. 900 soldiers from the Spanish Empire, 800 soldiers from Italian states outside of the Empire, 600 Knights Hospitaller, who they only count the people who are actually knights of the Order, not their supporters, 200 unaffiliated soldiers from Sicily and Greece. Which, by the way, I don't think amounts to the full amount, because there were also the huge numbers of civilians who reported. Various accounts include the civilians manning the walls as well, the citizens of Malta standing alongside the soldiers, fighting, etc. So I would say the citizens were just as prominent as ever in Maltese defense. I would also say there's rather a large number of, how do I put this? Retinue personnel, household retinue involved in the fight. And I, for some reason, don't feel like the galley slaves were probably heavily involved in the fighting, because galley slaves do not tend to be the most reliable soldiers in the world. In comparison, the Ottomans turned up with Dragut again, who gets killed this time, Mustafa Pasha, Ali Pasha, Salares, and Okili, who between them were in charge of between 35 and 40,000 soldiers, of which we don't know roughly how many of the defenders are killed. We have various figures for them, again. But we do have rough figures for how many of the Ottomans died. And it's between 25 and 35,000 are killed by disease and battle during the siege. 25 to 30,000. 25 to 35,000, I'm sorry. So A, it would certainly suggest that 40,000 soldiers is closer to the numbers if those figures are correct. B, I'm sorry, as much as I would love it to be the case, I have this sneaking suspicion, and it's just a sneaking suspicion, that what is totaled in as 8,600 troops was probably not the whole force involved in the fight on the Maltese side. I'm fairly certain that's just the ones which accord to the Spanish and the Knights of St. John, rather than being the Maltese ones. And I'm fairly sure they were a major part of it. Because if we go back to this one, it's roughly 16 to 18,000 civilians took up arms. That would make a lot of sense this time as well, because that would certainly turn that invading force into an absolute nightmare. Nine merchants. Saw a video the other day which was brazen anchoring by Fort St. Angelo in 1986. Great video, huge fanfare. I think she was the first iron ship to visit the base since the base closure. Looked very imposing, even Type 22 alongside. It will do. That's good. What's that you say? People who've been enslaved and forced to do a horrible job might not be the best people to give stabby influence to? No. Dan, how do you start to mount such casualties and not go, maybe this isn't the best idea? Well, this might explain why the siege didn't last that long, really. It's called the Great Siege, mainly because how many troops turn up and land. Not because of its length of time. It lasts from the 18th of May till the 11th of September, 1565. 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. Which is another reason why I'm fairly certain there are far more soldiers on the Maltese side than those listed. Because let me explain this. If you're telling me that in a siege are lasting a little over 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, exactly 3, oh my! So we're talking. We're talking roughly 114 to 116 days. Yeah. 114 to 116 days. You're telling me, and we're fairly sure about the results of this one, because the Ottomans keep records, that the Ottomans lose somewhere in the region of 25 to 35,000 soldiers killed in combat and from disease. And you're telling me that with minimal losses, this was all accomplished by 8,600 troops who were spread around numerous fortifications. And actually it gets worse, because there are some figures which actually put those numbers, those personnel, and I haven't in the Long Patrol said this, but that's because I found it. They actually put those numbers, the 900 soldiers, the 800 soldiers, 600, the 200, in with the 2,500 in terms of developing the total force of 6,100. And they basically put the garrison as 6,100 versus what they estimate to be a Ottoman force of 48,000. And that's a glorious, miraculous victory. And I'm sorry, I do not know how you are trying to claim that in earlier battles, the Maltese, when the Ottomans and various other Hasafids have then turned up, they have put 16 to 18,000 civilians in the field, armed and ready to defend their fortifications. And yet now, under the Great Siege, you're claiming that none of them turned up. Me is smelling a lot of propaganda going on here. It's all the Order of St. John and the Spanish Empire, you know. Not the Maltese citizens. They're not defending themselves at all. We also know a lot of personnel were killed and Fort St. Elmo fell. 1,500 troops killed. And the Turks lost half their Janissaries trying to take that fort. So this is when it starts to get pretty bad. But the problem you get into is when you start to look at this and you go, so you're saying they start off with 6,100 troops. They lose 1,500 in one battle alone. Yeah, which is about 25% of their force. The attackers, starting off with 48,000, lose in this battle, St. Elmo. They lose roughly 6,000 troops, which is what? An eighth of their force? Well, if you're going to keep exchanging an eighth of your force for 25% of the enemy force, then it sounds terrible, but you'll lose 50% of your force and they'll be wiped out, and you'll have the island. You then have to start caring, do the Ottomans care? No. The Italian town militias were generally powerful forces, for militia especially. They were usually very well trained and very well organized. However, looking at the Ottoman losses, at a certain point the sieging army got cornered somewhere and the former defenders were laid siege to them. I'm fairly certain at a certain point the siegers ran into some very, very nasty besieged. Georgian, Order of St. John did tend to exaggerate their own importance. The Order of St. John are very brave, very good warriors, but yeah. So a very messy battle, a massively messy battle. It's the sort of thing you really don't want to get into. It's not. It's the sort of battle which is going to be brutal, and the siege of Malta the Great Siege just gets worse. It's basically, and then it gets worse. I'm not sure about some of the modern historians' take on the importance of the siege. I think it's very easy when you're a long way back in history to write off places, oh, this isn't important as I was saying, but Malta is one of those places which really is quite important, because if they get it, then there's problems. One of the interesting things, again, about Malta is that the Spanish make a big thing about the reliefs and troops they send, but honestly, they send very tiny forces. Uh, they keep attacking, and they keep attacking and moving forces, and at one point they're attacking Fort St. Michael and Medina. In August, the Council of Elders decided to abandon the town and retreat to Fort St. Angelo. The Velette, however, and this is Medina, vetoed this proposal. If he guessed that the Turks were losing their will, he was correct. Probably. But I think myself, he just realised that in this way, any retreat over open ground was going to be annihilated. Bombardment continued, and eventually, when the Turks attempted to take Fort St. Michael, first with the help of trying a testudo formation, the Manta, and which was a small siege engine covered with shields, then by using an actual siege tower, the Maltese managed to tunnel out through the rubble and destroy the constructions with point-blank salvos of chain shot. Ouch. In September, the weather was turning. Mustafa decided to march to Medina to winter there. However, they failed to manage to take Medina. One of the interesting things is by this point, Medina was running short of supplies and defenders. Theoretically, again, it's short of supplies and defenders because they're only counting the professional soldiers. But according to the Turk sources, the walls were packed with people firing at them. And it started firing its cannon at the approaching Turks when they were at massively long range. And some of those balls seem to have skipped awfully close to the Turks, and they're not still. And basically, you get the thing of going, well, they were beyond range of getting accurate shot, but they do seem to do quite well. Again, suggesting there's quite a few more people manning those defences than just the few professional soldiers. And this caused the Turks to pull away, as they thought the outer city must have ammunition to spare and dozens and troops. And the Spanish turned up at the end, what they called the Gran Cerrito. Don Garcia turned up with 8,000 troops at St. Paul's Bay at the north end of the island. This is called the Grand Relief, the Grande Sorrostro. And basically they land there, they spot the Turks trying to retreat. Some of them, without waiting orders, decide to go and attack the Turks, and then, well, Don Garcia, seeing his troops fighting, has no choice but to order. The local commander for Don Garcia, De La Corona, seeing his troops fighting, has to send the rest of his troops to attack, apparently, and this leads to a massacre of the retreating Turkish troops. Gendo, that is apparently 8,000 troops confronting a much larger enemy, even if they are demoralized, of a lot of them. So I'm thinking probably a lot of Maltese civilians were involved as well. This is Fort St. Elmo, which of course fell at the beginning of the Grand Siege. It put up a tremendous defense. It fell I said it was protected. It had 1,500 soldiers in it. And it was not quite as this sort of model as it is now, but it was still fairly large. It fell to dozens upon of guns positioned on the higher ground of Mount Siberys. And yeah, they just basically the Ottoman force bombarded it to stone rubble and then attacked. Which sounds like another current modus operandi. The real question is, who killed more of the Turks, the Maltese or the illness? To be honest, I think some of the ones which are attributed to illness are probably Maltese, because I wouldn't be surprised if the Maltese were getting up to naughty stuff with the water as well. That's good. When did Wing's Hussars ride down the mountainside? Not as far as I know. That's good. And then it gets worse. It's just one of those campaigns which the Ottomans keep attacking for glorious victory, and it's always very small number of Maltese defenders manage to push off the humongous Ottoman force, and it's a case of, are you quite sure? Oh, and by the way, there just happen to be thousands of civilians who are just sitting in here doing nothing. The Maltese citizens, they're doing nothing. They're just sitting there. I'm going, really? That's a change from history. Every other time there's been a fight, the Maltese citizenry have taken up arms and got involved. But apparently during the Great Siege, they didn't. That's good. When you've got massed enemy units, you don't need to be too accurate with long-range cannon fire. The middle of the enemy army will do as an aim point. Yep. Hi, Jack Ray. Hi, Constantinopolis. No, sorry. I dread to imagine what the Maltese would have done to Nazi invaders. I'm fairly certain it would have made, well, certain other places, they would have been really well warmed up. Destroying the fortification is generally the option taken when the attacker has decided they can't hold the area. If they could hold the area, they'd want it intact. Yeah, this is the other problem, I think. This sounds strange. If you're turning up with that many troops, you've got the Ottoman supply lines, and you know that the largest the Spanish are going to send is roughly 8,000 troops, which are most theoretically then you'll say, let's put it this way. Let's say the numbers, my perception of them are accurate, and I'm reckoning it's more than 6,000. I'm reckoning it's roughly 8,000 or something professional troops, or let's say they're right and it's 6,100. Well, even if I'm right, it's 8,600. And they have 8,000 more troops come from Spain, or from the Spanish Empire nearby in Italy. So you have 16,000 soldiers against 48,000 Ottomans. And yes, I know the Ottomans are variable. Some are Janissaries, some are not. But that's not really going to drive the Ottomans from the field, so they can continue laying siege to you. The only reason the Ottomans are trying to rush this and push this is not because of the Spanish troops coming. It's because something else is going on. And that's got to be the Maltese citizenry. Because they're the only other option there. They're the only other variable. So, here we get to the third siege. And this is the most interesting of all the sieges, because technically, you have the French control the island. But the French are being besieged by the Maltese citizenry, who don't want them there, who are being supported by the Royal Navy, who are supporting the Maltese, but are also technically besieging the island themselves. So you can say the French, in some respects, are a sort of almost like this crust, this thin crust around a circle. And the inner circle is full of Maltese who don't want them there and are seriously hurting them. And the outer circle, beyond that, is the Royal Navy, who don't want them there and are hurting them. And there are French caught in middle. And it's brutal. Are there any climate restrictions for Malta? Not really. It's in the Mediterranean. It's really quite nice all year round. Colin, speaking of Ottoman supply lines, wasn't it intercepted here and there? They had great trouble with any supplies which were brought ashore. Hi, Cascadian. I want to know any good books about the Ottoman state. I do know a few good books, but let me just look one up because I have it. But Claire Norton, is her book out? Claire Norton. Yeah, you'll want to look up Claire Norton. She taught me at St Mary's. Really, really good. The Renaissance and the Ottoman World. London 20 edited with which is a book, one of the books she edited, which is published by Ashgate in 2013. Oh, she did a book with Mark Donnelly. I didn't realise that. And if you want to learn more about Ottoman sieges, she did a great book in 2017 with Routledge called Plural Pass, Paradentine in the Ottoman Sieges of Nakhichevan. She's also done some works about history with Mark Donnelly, and Mark Donnelly and her were two very, very good lecturers. I have to admit, I don't always agree with what either of them write, but I like them both as lecturers because they were prepared to have someone in the room who didn't agree with them. And she's very, very good. But yeah, so if you're look up Dr. Claire Norton, and she's from St Mary's University, Twickenham, and she is excellent. And if anyone's books are going to help you, it'll be hers. Sorry, I got distracted by her book list. That's good. The Ottomans might well have looked at the resistance of Maltese and realised it'd be incredibly hard to hold the islands. Maybe not worth the cost or not affordable at the time. Honestly, in their past, they have a tradition of wiping out entire populations, so if they thought that was the viable option, then they'd have probably done that. But the thing is, obviously the population persuading them very quickly that wiping them out would be incredibly expensive. Well, honestly, I do feel for the French in the Third Siege. I do feel for them because basically, if they face the sea, they've got the Maltese behind them attacking them from the rear. And if they try and concentrate on the Maltese, they've got the British coming up the rear. So basically, whichever way they go, they're constantly having to go cover their front and back. It's just a constant problem for them. And it also does last 1798 to 1800. But here is a list of sort of force involved. There are roughly expected to be 10,000 Maltese personnel involved. The French had a garrison of between 6 and 7,000. The British supplied 16 ships. The Portuguese supplied 5. Anglo-Portuguese operation. Roughly 20,000 civilians seem to have died. Maltese civilians seem to have died due to disease. 4,000 French surrendered. At least 2,000 were killed, wounded, sick, or dead to disease. And the British suffered light casualties. The Maltese officially 300 casualties in fighting. Yeah. Basically, the French turned up and decided they were going to dismantle things such as the Knights of St. John, the Roman Catholic Church, including looting and seizing the property from the church to pay for the expedition to Egypt. And for some reason, this upset the Maltese population. I can't think why. A deeply Catholic population that's own religion has been the reason for their persecution or several invasions during their history. Yeah, I can't think why they'd find it annoying. At one point, the French garrison is all driven back into Valletta, and it's surrounded by roughly 10,000 soldiers led by Emmanuel Vitale and Canon Francisco Severana Caruna. Yes, one of the local Catholic priests and later Bishop of Malta was upset by the French. This was not a good maneuver. This is... Okay. Occupation 101. You're more likely to be able to occupy for a long time if you leave well alone local institutions, which are happy to keep going as long as someone else is providing law and order and not interfering with them. If you start interfering with them, those local institutions become the basis of a problem. At this point, a squadron of Portuguese ships arrived on the island to support their fellow Catholics. And then after that, a squadron of British ships arrived and attached themselves. Now, I have to admit, the British ships which are alive were mostly survivors of the Battle of the Nile and under Captain James Samaras, and were basically not really able to do much for the siege. However, the fact is, at this point is when Vabois, the French commander, realizes he has got, sitting off his coast, somewhere in the region of 21 ships at a line, all looking at him. And they all look in fine enough order to sail according to him. He doesn't realize how much damage they've had. And so Samaras meets with the Maltese, then sends an offer of truce to Valois on their command. Valois' response was, "You might have forgotten that the French hold this place. The fate of the inhabitants is none of your concern. As for your ultimatum, French soldiers are not accustomed to such a tone." This was a little bit silly, because Samaras then decided to provide the Maltese with weapons. Then departed for Gibraltar. And some more British ships turned up. This time under the command of Captain Alexander Ball, in charge of HMS Alexander. HMS Alexander is a beautiful ship. If anyone wants to look her up, she was a 74-gun third rate of the line, and frankly, I feel she was probably one of the finest of the Royal Navy's third rates. Named for Alexander the Great, of course, but all Alexanders are naturally great. So HMS Alexander was certainly a powerful vessel. And while she would spend a little bit of time under French control, she spends most of her life in the Royal Navy. And of course, she's even better than that. She's an Alfred-class ship of the line. The fact that the Royal Navy had an Alfred class of 4 third rates just makes me joyous, because it's HMS Alexander, HMS Alfred, HMS Warrior, and HMS Montague. They're just beautiful. They're beautiful. Anyway, so they turn up, and Valois immediately withdraws everything into Valletta. His garrison by that point numbered roughly 3,000. And yeah, life just gets worse. On 24th of October, Nelson himself turns up. And on 28th of October, Ball manages to get the garrison of Gozo to surrender with their entirety of cannon, fortifications, ammunition, and sacks of flour to the British. And they immediately gave the food and captured supplies to the island's inhabitants, which for some reason made the inhabitants very happy. British captains also made sure their carpenters were at the service of various local churches, etc., which needed things repaired and replaced in terms of wooden furniture, which again, the British a lot of support. You know, it's just some hearts and minds stuff going on. That's good. The Ottomans might well have looked at the resistance of the Maltese and realised it'd be incredibly hard to hold lands. Yeah. Definitely. Stafford Johnson. The debate as to civilian involvement was always fun one with my former friend's father. He's on your side, whereas I didn't know much and was going off books. Yeah, never try. Official sources when it comes to civilian involvement can be kind of interesting. And it's kind of like, me and Drac were having the conversation on the last episode of Bilge Pumps to Air. And there will be more recorded soon, but when he gets back from America, basically, probably. And we're having that discussion about, I think it's the last one, might be one of the ones before that, the people in the Home Guard. And you have to remember 3 things. 1, they're mostly people who served in World War I. 2, and survived. 2, they're going to be fighting in their home area, which they know like the back of their hands. And 3, all the horrors of World War I, they're going to have going through their heads as things you're going to do to their families who are there covering while they try and withdraw and buy them time to get away. That is not a group you want to take on. And that's the other thing when you're looking at these sort of civilian sieges. A lot of the people who are civilians at this point, who are just citizens, might well have fought in previous wars. There's the day-to-day surviving of life in the medieval period, which is going to be pretty brutal and pretty hard. So, let's go for it. Let's go for our modern world. If you were talking about it, let's say you meet a butcher. Nice way, they tend to be fairly skilled with blades. They're not a member of the armed forces, but in this kind of era, where you are, especially in the earlier battles, where you are fighting with bladed instruments, a butcher is probably going to be pretty up there on your thing of things you don't want to take on. And then you've got the carpenters, you've got the big people who, big, heavy built men, usually, who are work with building stuff all day, mining, carpentry, all like farming at this time, all incredibly labor intensive, incredibly hard muscle work. And then you've got to forget again, we go through it, but I know I keep having to say this, but I am going to say this again. You go through the women at the time, and they are doing the same jobs alongside the men because they have to work in the farm and the fields as well. And in a nice way, no one is sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. That is very much a imagined view of Victorian upper class. It's not a realistic one, because the whole idea of being a person of leisure presumes you don't have to do anything else. And as we talked about earlier, if the Lord was away, the lady of the manor ran the estates. That was what she did. She would be running the estates in his name. That was the whole reason lords got married, was so that they would have someone who they could rely on to run the state in their absence, who they hoped would not take things over, and so they couldn't get it when they got back and would keep it safe. And they needed to be someone they could trust. And it was a very, very foolish lord who didn't marry someone who was smart and capable, because you were going to come back and find your estates impoverished. So that's the reality of what you're dealing with. It's not what I call it. What I always tell people is movies and fiction are black and white. Real life, it's shades of grey at best. It's a technically shades of a rainbow in normal times. That's good. Regarding the destruction of soldiers, how long into the siege did it start? From basically day one, they were almost trying to land there. And trying to do it. That's good. As I'm remembering right, that Liège had to be besieged in 1942? Yeah, pretty much. That's everyone. I can imagine Her Majesty's Naval Base Malta provided employment, and when certain ships like Hood show up, it gets attention. It does. Descott, the third siege suggests the British learned from the mistakes that made while trying to control the locals in the 70s in what became US. Namely, don't purposely antagonize local population or to show that you're in charge around here. You have to remember there's also a small difference in that the British still believed that the American locals were British stock and would react as the British would. They didn't really understand in the 1770s that the Americans weren't local. There's also the fact that, honestly, the Americans never got sent the best commanders and the best people because they were always busy fighting the French, who were far more scary. To me, it sounds like you just described a group who have decided their lives are lost and will use their last breath to take your entire company down with them in whatever way possible. Yep. That's a very scary group you don't want to deal with. That's what the Lady of the Castles were generally responsible for running most of the day-to-day issues of the estate, from what I understand. Yeah. They have to be smart. Thunderic Ironhammer, something, something, wounded, cornered animal, something, something, dark side, yeah. Seneca, like Hornblower, who is now 3 years married and was with his wife of what I know were together 5 days out of 3 years. Yeah, that's pretty much, that's par for the course for a naval officer in that period. That's good. I don't mean the starts attempts to level capture a fortress in the Grand Siege, but the starts attempts to level it. Basically, in the Grand Siege, if we go back again to the Grand Siege, my timeline. I'm getting my timeline up. So the Turkish Armada arrives and lands on the 18th and 19th of May. And it's the 23rd of June where they finally seize all the forts in AMO and take and kill the remaining defenders, roughly 1,500 troops. They started the bombardment on the 27th of May, so 8 days into their invasion, they started the bombardment, which would destroy basically turn the fort to rubble. They managed to turn the fort into rubble roughly by the 3rd of June, but it took them a further 20 days. Because, let's be honest, on the 8th of June, the knights in the fort sent a message to the Grand Master saying that the fort can no longer be held, but were told that St. Elmo must hold until reinforcements arrive. And the knights continue to hold. They refuse. They basically they're fighting over rubble. It's actually during this battle that here is the interesting question. There are both slave and hired galley oarsmen, and I have this feeling that the slave oarsmen, it's the hired galley oarsmen who are doing more fighting than the slaves, but the slave is part of the mystery, as well as native oarsmen, Elmo, as well as native Maltese soldiers. Native Maltese soldiers. Where are native Maltese soldiers going to come from? I'm reckoning those household forces and the militias were reportedly fought and died and are described as almost as bravely as the knights themselves. And Dragut, the only Ottoman commander to die in the battle, is actually killed by his one of his own cannon. Although there are some accounts which say it was a lucky shot from Fort St. Angelo, the odds are he was in charge of a cannon being lowered, and he was going lower, lower, lower. You want to hit the base, and eventually it blew him up, hit him in the head and killed him. So yeah. I would. Yeah, it's about 4 weeks of constant bombardment. And as said, it costs the Turks roughly 6,000 troops to do it. After they've taken Fort St. Elmo, the commander of the Ottoman forces, Mustafa Pasha, has the bodies of the knights decapitated, and their bodies floated across the bay on mock crucifixes. In response to this, the Valletta beheads all his Turkish prisoners, which he's taken, loads the heads into his cannons, and fires them into the Turkish camp. How? This is what we're talking about siege warfare in this period. It's not nice. It's not. Probably going to have to put a warning on this at some point. May cause nightmares. Dirt Squad. I understand that a lot of British officials in the pre-US were telling London to stop antagonising people quite often during the early 1770s. They were. I'm saying they didn't get the best over there. I'm not saying they got complete idiots. Ron Cash, have been wondering why I'm not. Okay, I'm going to state this. I like Mrs. Cash. I have chatted with her in the past. She's a lovely lady. So I'm just saying this. I'm reading Roland's words, not my own. I've been wondering why I married such a willful and opinionated woman, Dr. Clarke, and now I know, to run my estates in my absence. The thing is, that the first part of the line. Roland, if you're still here on Sunday, we'll enjoy chatting with you. You are just missing the estate. Alex, is this how bowling was invented? Considering various forms of bowling have possibly been around as long as the Romans, since the Roman times, and some do involve interesting things being used as the proxy for the ball. Yeah. When was my last snack? Don't worry, I'm fine. I have got Quality Street left over from an Easter egg here if I want anything. To be honest, the third siege is practically civilized compared to that. Practically civilized. Yeah. This is January 1941 in the Grand Hammer. Now, I have this picture is cool because if you look very carefully, you can see an aircraft carrier sitting in a dry dock. Secondly, it's cool because of all the explosions that go off. But also, what's cool to me is I'm sitting here looking, and if you're very careful, you can see that despite the fighting and all the things going on, you can see people. So I'm laughing at jokes in the chat, and I've got this picture. I was about to look so inappropriate, but it's just. This is one of those scenarios where it's called a siege, and it is a siege because the islands are under blockade virtually. The British have to run convoys through. They're under constant air attack, constant threat of assault. And yet, honestly, and this is terrible to say because of the amount of people who are killed and are hurt and injured, whose lives are forever changed by the bombing and things that go on. Compared to the other sieges, this is easy going for the Maltese. I mean, seriously. Their probably answers are sitting there going, all they did was drop some bombs on you. There were no beheadings. You didn't stick any heads inside cannon. No, we didn't. You sure not even? No, we didn't need to. Jordan, got to go in 10 minutes. Got an appointment to look at a 150 plus year old church and that. Cool. That'll be fun. Ryan Cash, yeah. So you're just hoping she also isn't listening to this show, right? Mm-hmm. That's what things seem to be getting dicey around here. Right, George Newman, Right Alley, Doc. Presbyterian, founded by Scots. Ooh, cool. Sounds interesting. Right, so these are some of the images from the Fourth Siege, and what I really like is Malta never hides its history. If you go there, you will notice that they don't hide; they embrace their history in all its colourful detail. That is the old opera house at the top, and the top. Well, let's see. That's left of the screen, and that's right of the screen. So, in the top right of the screen, as you're looking at it, you can see the old opera house, and it's been turned into this open air concert venue, and it's really cool. The thing is, I have seen videos of it since I have got to go to Malta again. I've got to go, but we'll leave that to one side. There is a picture which I swear every time I've seen it, I almost wonder if it's fake, because to me things don't look quite right. But I'm told it's completely real. It's of an Italian bomber over Malta. There is some of the destruction done to Valletta, and this, of course, is in one of the graving docks. It lasts the 11th of June 1940 to 20th of November 1942. It is the longest siege they go under. Broadly speaking. Technically, it gets interesting once you compare it to the Third Siege, because technically that is September 1798 to September 1800. So that's technically 2 years, 2 days. But the thing is, I don't really consider that the Siege of Malta, because I consider it known as the Siege of Valletta, rather than the Siege of Malta, really, the Third Siege, because most of it is actually the French being besieged by the Maltese. Whereas this is actually Malta under siege. Ron Cash, I did tell her you were doing Malta, her favourite place. Oh, you poor, poor summer child. Coming up, books were expensive? No. I'm trying not to laugh at the chat too much. This is a fight which is interesting in that who gets involved again, because we often don't remember quite how many of the Maltese end up joining the British Armed Forces in World War II, and how many end up fighting in the various theatres of war for the British. But the British supply roughly 716 fighters over the course of the campaign. Over the course of the campaign, the Axis forces will use roughly 2,000 aircraft. The Allies will lose 369 fighters in the air, 64 fighters on the ground. The Germans will lose 357 aircraft. The Italians 175 aircraft. The British were also having damage, and this is as much during the course of the Battle of the Mediterranean, I think, as much as the Battle of Malta. And that's the trouble. The Battle of the Mediterranean comes along as well, especially the convoy battles. Aircraft carriers damaged and sunk. Battleships damaged. Cruisers damaged and sunk. Destroyers damaged and sunk. Submarines. Roughly, the British will lose 2,300 airmen killed or wounded operating from Malta. There'll be 30,000 buildings destroyed or damaged. and at least 1,300 civilians killed. However, Malta will be critical to sinking, and this in the descriptions, roughly 72% of the Italian Navy transport fleet, 23% of the total Axis merchant fleet. Now, those figures, if you the percentages, sound pretty big. Well, let's look at the percentage, the figure in terms of numbers. Malta can be directly linked to supporting or actually providing the forces that attack and sink 2,304 enemy merchant ships. 2,304 enemy merchant ships, totaling somewhere region of 17,240 Axis personnel killed at sea. They will also account for some region of supporting and entire fighting. So this is sort of over the entire Mediterranean theatre of operations. 50 German U-boats and 16 Italian submarines, plus many cruisers and other Italian vessels, which will be hit by the flotilla, the submarine flotilla based there, and the Force K base there, and all the other things. If you go and look at the Force K video, you'll see an entire section of what they get up to based from Malta. This is a very scary place if you are considering it from an Axis perspective. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting time, but again, what is the purpose of Malta at this point? Well, let's do it this way. Why does Malta matter in World War II? Well, again, it's that east-west, north-south trade, isn't it? Yes, it is. I want to move my forces from Italy to North Africa. They're going past Malta. They're going within range of aircraft, and goodness me, thank goodness for the Axis, they actually managed to get control of Crete, because if there had been any sort of, in terms of competent, joined up at the strategic level defense of Crete, then if Crete had been under control of the British, of the Allies, as well as Malta, then frankly the Axis campaign in North Africa would have probably died a horrible death very early on, because there is no way, if you have aircraft and ships operating out of Crete and being able to stage aircraft from Crete and supplies from Crete to Malta, you would actually get anything along those routes down to Benghazi or any of the other critical cities. So literally you would turn, the only supply route would be from Naples to Tripoli if you had Crete as well as Malta. That would be the only only vaguely safe supply route for the Italians, which could well mean that you drive the Italians back to Tripoli very early in the war. And if you drive the Italians back to Tripoli that early in the war, then, well, who knows what the British get up to. Submarines, aircraft, everything operates from Malta. And of course, Force K as well, surface ships. It's really not that nice. Did Allied subs get out at night from Malta, and how soon could they submerge? Well, considering when the submarines were in Malta during the day, they tended to submerge in the harbour. so they wouldn't be spotted by bombers. If we go back to this earlier picture I showed you. There are submarines in this picture. You can't see them because they're below water, but there are submarines in this picture. It's like also there is probably submarines in this picture as well, but you can't see them because they're below water. That's what the submarines did in the day if they were still in Malta. So they could submerge pretty quickly. Code 85. When they say emergency ship, what's the criteria to counter such? Weight? Function, usually. It's a critical space. And again, it's one of those things, if you don't have Malta, then imagine how much easier the Italian-German supply lines of their troops is going to be in North Africa. Suddenly their job gets made dramatically easier and the problems for the Allies multiply. This is the strategic rationale behind actually sustaining and supplying Malta. It's why it's so important to take those odds and fight those convoy battles and run those ships run those supplies through. Because if you keep keep Malta going, you stop the Axis in North Africa. There is no doubt in my mind that the foundation for victory in North Africa is laid in Malta in 1941-42. 1941 especially, that is the victory. That is the point which lays the lines for the victories in North Africa. If you don't have control of Malta, you don't get it. If you'd had control of Crete and of Malta, then honestly, I don't see how the North African campaign, how the Italians managed to push further than, well, if we consider where they can get to, and if they will have to be coming from Naples, they'll be having to come that supply line. Maybe they'll be able to get to Benghazi, maybe, but the odds are their supplies and the only port which is going to take their big ships is going to be Tripoli that they can get to with their bigger ships. And that becomes an even bigger problem. Because if you've got... Let's put it this way. It's difficult enough to attack your opponent when they're spread over this many supply routes. It complicates matters. If you have it so that you can watch those supply routes, but you can have attacking forces in Crete and in Malta ready to go, so you don't have to have attacking aircraft going out there, and so can concentrate your attacking forces on one supply route, then you're in even more trouble. And if you consider under those circumstances, if you'd had fighters in Crete, fighters in Malta, you've got the convoys going through with an aircraft carrier, if you've driven the Italians off this coast, but we're using the army, then you've got a straight shot into Malta with air defences and fighters probably from North Africa, from the areas of North Africa going, and Malta and Crete assisting carriers. Then there's a resupply. Malta becomes a lot easier, and that changes the entire North African campaign. Malta cannot be overstated its importance. If you combine Malta and Crete, you'd have changed the entire first couple of years of World War II. Naval, I want a Dr. C t-shirt with "There are submarines in this photograph" caption on it. That'd be a fun t-shirt. I might have to make that one. Hydration. I'm avoiding the whole thing going on with the Blackburn right now. I am avoiding it because it would just make me giggle. Right then, summary, Malta. It's a beautiful place. Go there on holiday. Stop invading it! Right, Colin Crash, I'm here early. All my transgressions will be forgiven. We'll cross fingers for you. I recommend you buy dinner this evening. So Gozo and Malta. Someone's already talked about little islands around it. Interesting. Was there ever a planned pre-World War II to fortify Malta like Gibraltar? Yes, there were. The British did have plans to fortify Malta, and certainly if war hadn't... Again, this is one of those things people forget. If war hadn't come till 1942, Singapore would have been far more fortified. So would Hong Kong, so would Malta. Probably the British would have also put something into Crete semi-permanently. Hello, Gogolander. It's those things in terms of World War II comes when it comes, and then there's a problem. I'm sorry, the chat's making me laugh. Okay, I'm back. It's a beautiful place to go. But as I've kept returning to it, and honestly, my favourite map for illustrating it is this one, right back at the beginning, which is why I use it first. Malta, it's all about location, location, location. It is attacked because of where it is. If you think about it, if you are the Ottomans, if you have control of, or the Safavids, if you have control of Malta, you can control the trade routes, but you can also use it as a staging post to attack Sicily. If you can attack Sicily, you can then go into Italy. Work your way up Italy, you can do to Rome what you did to Byzantium. And let's be honest, calling Italy, and especially southern Italy, the soft underbelly of Europe, is not something which Winston Churchill, A, was the first to do, and B, was the first to make a fashionable phrasing. Lots of people have been talking about it for a long time. They forget that that's tremendously mountainous terrain in southern Italy. It's really not fun to go fighting through. Just because Hannibal managed it doesn't mean you will. Hannibal was Hannibal. He was special. Don't presume you're going to be it. And there's also context of the time what he's fighting. But it is tremendously interconnected. It is an interwoven key point in the fabric of the Mediterranean, and control of it is critical. The reason the Spanish are prepared to supply the troops they are to help St. John and Sicily and the King of Sicily, etc., secure it, is because they want a presence to sort of protect their end of the Mediterranean from the Ottoman end. So that's Malta's problem. As I started off this by talking about going, they have wonderful food, they have wonderful history. You can do 10 centuries in 10 minutes. And you literally can. 10 centuries in 10 minutes. But the whole reason for invading them has not been about the Maltese. And this is why I think the Maltese are often forgotten when they're making their decisions. When you're making your decision to invade this island, these islands, people don't look at them and go, oh, there's Valletta, there's Mostar, there's Medina, there's Rabat, there's Zeebrugge. They don't see that and think these things. They don't sit there and think those were the Islamic settlements, those are the Christian settlements, where that's where the people have lived alongside each other and grown up together and been there for many, many years. No. What they see is just islands. The problem for Malta, and one of the reasons why I think the reason I think the invasions fail, is because they are a point on a map, and everyone sees them as a stepping stone to elsewhere, so no one really bothers to study them. And if anyone had actually paid attention, they'd have realised you're going to be dealing with one of the most hostile populations you're ever going to come in. And in the medieval, you're going to come up against. And in the nicest way, in the medieval era, you haven't got the rules you have got today. And seriously, you've got some really nasty people going around. You could have just slaughtered entire populations. It's what the Vikings did. And before anyone says the Vikings didn't, how do we know if a population is entirely slaughtered before people move in? Anyone want to guess? You track the names of the area. Because if some of the old tongue names survive, that means the population was still around to give them their names. If the population is all gone, then there's no one there to remember its names, so they'll get new names, and that's where the names come from. So basically, if a population is entirely wiped out, the names of places change. So it's not something which isn't unusual. And let's be honest, if you're carting off 6,000 into slavery from Gozo, you're pretty much trying to do it to Gozo. That's good. Also, remember that Hannibal didn't succeed in invading Italy. He ran around for a couple of years, but ultimately defeated Italy and again in Carthage. Actually, he was ultimately forced to withdraw from Italy to Carthage because of what Scipio Africanus was doing in the rest of the Carthaginian Empire. Basically, they withdrew him because of fear of Scipio coming to Carthage and their best general and the best army being in the wrong place. Mrs. Rowland. Hello, Mrs. Rowland. Hope you're well. And you love Malta too, until Roland took you around and told you all the history. Yeah. Look, if you don't want to hear a lot of people getting killed in some very brutal and absolutely evil ways, and occasionally incredibly inventive ways, and quite disturbingly inventive, especially if you're a historian who's sort of, to an extent, how do I put this, inoculated against these things. You can put yourself to one side for a few minutes and you're listening, just absorbing history and going, oh, that's a really interesting way to do that. And then it's about next day you're going, oh my god, that just hit me. Okay, that's going to require a bottle of iron brew and a lot of pasta. Iron brew, please. Again, iron brew. Nice place. But it is worthwhile going to. It is worthwhile going to. If you need a good knife for burning, isn't it? Sounds good. No, we found this island totally uninhabited. Pushes something behind a rock. Yeah. Carolina, wasn't the well-being of the civilian population the least concern the Axis power zone? Yeah. They weren't bothered about that at all. But honestly, again, it's... The problem for the Axis powers, and this is going to sound strange, is every time they do a bombing campaign, they're doing a bombing campaign with medium bombers. Neither Italy nor... And it just... This is just the big problem. And I will say this for the country which gave the world Giulio Douhet, the absolute prophet of air power and the superiority of air power, and air power is one. The guy who talked about bombers dropping 100 tons of biological warfare weapons and chemical bombs on cities. Yeah, that's what Gilio Duhay. Please go read his book. You'll find it. It is what he's talking about. And all these things. He's the guy. Then you look at it and go, so the Italians developed some heavy bombers in World War II? Nope. They had a handful. So the Germans must have had heavy bombers? No. Who had heavy bombers? The Allies. Lots of them. Japanese had a few as well. Yeah. I'll hide that message, Mrs. Cash, until he. Oh, okay, that's been let through. It's. Yeah, I think Roland, you need to run. So yeah. So basically, Gilio Duhay, Italy, they don't have heavy bombers. They don't. And even the Germans said they are doing all these attacks, all these bombing campaigns with medium bombers. And they do absolutely devastating attacks to an extent. But then you realise that the British heavy bomber force in fighting in Northern Europe, bombing from the UK, would turn up with 1,000 bombers, each carrying more bombs than any of their German counterparts could carry, and just go bye-bye to entire cities. It's... Okay, alright. Yeah, in the UK it's 999. We're all hope. We'll pray for Roland's soul. So this does make the siege different. The siege is not that bad. You know, the siege is bad. It is not like. Let me rephrase that. The siege is bad. It's not a fun experience for anyone to go through, but it's not the worst siege Malta's ever been through. And honestly, it might be called the Great Siege and the Third Siege, but I don't think the Great Siege is the worst either. Invasion of Gozo has to stand up there, but so does the First Siege. The First Siege and the invasion of Gozo, in fact, I would argue the invasion of Gozo is possibly the worst, because 6,000 soldiers, civilians are enslaved. Between 5,000 and 6,000. It's just no. It's not good. Oh god, the chat's going worse. I'm very sympathetic to poor Roland now. I feel he might not be worse for long. But there again, then we'll have Mrs. Cash watching. I presume she'll take over watching us, which will be good. So, you can write the books, invent the theories, but if you can't join that up to your procurement policies. The thing is, I would argue that the big problem for Duhay is I don't think his theory of the totality of air power is ever proved correct, because it looks at war as being entirely waged on the civilian populations and you wipe out whole cities. And I said, you carry 100 tons of bombs, which no bomber has, to my recollection, ever carried. And basically you're dropping biological chemical weapons, you're wiping out civilian populations. And you could point to a nuclear blast and say that's it, but the trouble is nuclear blasts have then gone straight into strategic deterrent because they have so much firepower. And that's the problem, because you're either talking about having so much firepower that it's mutually assured, because whatever you deploy, the enemy will deploy to you, or you don't have necessary firepower to deliver on that, in which case you've got to do something more surgically strike. In which case, there are air power theorists who I have a lot of time for, but Gilio Duhay is the first one, and I have less time for him than that. Probably. Well, Mr. Cash, look at Belfast next Friday. I'm sure he'll have fun. I'm also going to be up in London next Friday, so I will check in the Thames and see if he's going bobbing past me. There was the HE-117, 1,200 of them bought, 1,200 of them. The HE-117. Let's see. Right, so Heinkel Heavy 117, yes, 4-engined heavy bomber, theoretically 1,169 produced. That's pretty much the heavy bomber you've got. Most of those ones built are ARB variants, built by ARB, and they are mostly largest number are the A5s, and they had let's see, they could carry up to £15,000 worth of bombs. Okay, let's just pick one type of British bomber to do the comparison with. So, Lancasters. Okay, so we had less than 1,200 Heinkel 117s produced. The Lancasters were 7,377, so there are 6 Lancasters for every Heinkel, and that's just one of the British heavy bombers. The Heinkel pretty much is it. And the Heinkel could carry £15,000 worth of high explosive, and the Lancaster, for the Lancaster 1 variant, the I, could carry £14,000 worth of explosives. So 1,000 left, but there are 6 of them for every one of the Heinkels. This is not saying that the Germans were not designing good aircraft. It's just that, in the nicest way, if you're going to do heavy bombing, you need a lot more than 12. You need a lot more than just just below 1,200 if you're going to do it, and especially if you're going to do 1,000 bomber raids. Let's see, how bad is it for the Germans if Admiral Hipper and Gneisenau sunk during the Norway campaign? As in, Whale has wings volume 1, that happens. Well, that's... just quickly, if I'm going to answer this question, I'll go to Naval History's Coming for the last few minutes. Let's see, how's it like? How bad is it for the Germans if Admiral Hipper and Gneisenau sunk during the Norway campaign? It doesn't really change things much for the Germans, but it does make things easier for the British, because it means, in the nicest way, if Gneisenau sunk, then depending on where she sunk, her and Scharnhorst aren't. When she sunk, her and Scharnhorst aren't out, and therefore they don't lose Glorious. What is it, Glorious? And so that can save. That can things. Basically, it's a compound thing. The Germans therefore have one less battleship. Their great attack into the Atlantic probably involves Scharnhorst and a cruiser at that point if they do it. But if they've lost Hipper and Nisenau, they're going to be down their largest cruiser, and so they might well be the Lutzow, which goes out with the Scharnhorst, or the Scheer, which goes out the Scharnhorst, which would slow them down, which means they might get intercepted by the British. And if they get intercepted by the British, then they might get sunk, in which case the Germans go down quite early on to only having 2 major battleships, in which case the British have a lot more forces for able to move around the world, in which case that's going to change the Mediterranean campaign, which means it's going to be more forces in the Mediterranean, and if there's more forces in the Mediterranean, that might then lead to the Italians losing more forces. The Italians lost more forces, and the British will have more forces free that can deploy to the Far East when they're preparing for the Pacific, and for the worrying about deterring the Japanese, which could well change the fate of whatever is Force Z at the time, because it could well be a properly formed up fleet with an aircraft carrier, etc. And as I've kept trying to say, these small changes are butterflies, they're compounding. You change one thing early on, you save an aircraft carrier, the Germans lose a capital ship, you will have a knock-on impact on all of our operations. And things just get complicated. Right. So we're coming up to the 3-hour mark, and usually to the point at which I say thank you very much for watching and good evening, because you've all been very nice. I'm going to answer the final questions, but I'm going to say what have we got coming up. We have the Sentinel class on Tuesday. We then have the County class War in Retrospect on the 3rd of May. I am recording all these before I go away. Recording both of those. I'm trying to record those tomorrow, actually. And yeah, I'm trying to get a fairly large chunk of that all recorded, so that's all done, so I can have June all recorded before I go away in June. And it's going to be fun. It is. Also, I've got to have my tooth out at some point, so I've got to try and get some stuff recorded so that it covers if when I have my tooth out. Senator, after Norway, the British managed to Copenhagen the German Navy. What changes? Let's put it this way. If the British Copenhagen the German Navy, that is, take out their major surface assets. Let's say the Germans put all their battleships and cruisers together in one fjord up in Norway for some reason, and the British get wind of it and manage to go in and blow it up. Then, depending on the losses the British sustain in the operation, and if they Copenhagen it, that's theoretically not many, then what would happen is the British would be free to concentrate on the Mediterranean until, well, the British major units would be free to concentrate on the Mediterranean. Basically, it would turn the North Atlantic into, you might need a couple of cruisers wandering around there, but not much. Might need some destroyers wandering around for escort, but not much. Mostly it's going to be an anti-submarine war, in which case you can get your major assets out the way, have them operating in a nice, safe, cool zone where you can deploy them from if you need them, but they're mostly kept back away from the German submarines, and they can go and operate in the Mediterranean and focus on the Italians, in which case you free up carriers, you free up everything to go and concentrate on the Italians, which could cause the Italians to lose more ships because they'll be dealing with far larger attacks, especially if this happens earlier on. And as it happens in Norway, let's say it would happen in 1940, that happens in 1940, then between 1940 and 41, you could see a lot of damage happen to the Italians. You could see a Taranto operation, which has a very large air component. And then that means that by the time it gets to roughly 1941, the forces you are free to deploy to the Indian Ocean could be quite significant. And it probably would be deployed to the Indian Ocean because you'd be going, well, we have them there. If we need them back in the Atlantic, we can probably get them back in time. Southampton, yeah, they're very cool pictures from Smith Falls. Sad one that Railway Museum isn't open yet. Take care, Dirk Richards. Thank you. Thank you, Millie6040. Thank you, John Shea. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Vision. Thank you, Roland Cash. Hope you survive. No dispute eruption bot to the chat. Don't worry about that. Mainly making me giggle. Thank you, Seneca Nero. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Derp Squad. Thank you, Darren Khan, Hammer, Night 6031. Thank you, Freeman. Thank you, Dan and Stafford, for adminning the chat. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed. What else was I going to say? Yes, and for those who are watching now but who weren't watching in the beginning, just a quick run through. This is the Canada plan, and I think Stafford has volunteered to take the lead in organising the dinner for the Canadian fans. So please contact him on Discord, and I'm sure he'll put things together and run things excellently. He's a really nice guy. Thank you. With the help, I seem to remember, the also helpful volunteering of the lovely mad scientist in our midst. We do always have at least one mad scientist in our midst, but normally our resident mad scientist is the very, very nice. I'm just finding and making sure I'm going to get his first name right, because I just think of him as the mad scientist quite often. Nope. Can't find it. He obviously got off the chat a while ago, but basically, between the two of them, they're going to organise it, and I'm sure they'll do an absolutely great job. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for watching. Have fun. Oh. Thanks, Carl. Yes, Wayne Boring, the absent-minded scientist. Always need a minded man and scientist. Always need to have him around. Thank you very much, everyone, and have fun. Bye. Hope.